Our Bible study tonight is going to be taken from 2 Samuel chapter 17. And if you remember, when we studied last week, Absalom had revolted against his father David. And he's able to take the city of Jerusalem without any bloodshed because David decides instead of staying and fighting, he's going to take all his stuff and his men and run away out of the city. And so the question now becomes, how is Absalom going to pursue David? How is he going to track him down and assassinate him so that he can make his claim to the throne of Israel final? And remember that Ahithophel, who was David's trusted friend and one of his most trusted advisors, he actually betrays him. He becomes a traitor and turns over to Absalom's side. But David kind of counters that by sending back one of his other counselors, Hushai, to try to defeat the counsel of Ahithophel. And so let's go to 2 Samuel chapter 17, and we're going to study about how Ahithophel and Hushai counsel Absalom and what he decides to do. I will mention that we do have some questions that we're going to be going over that were posted that you can print off the internet if you want to follow along. In verse 1 of 2 Samuel 17, it says, "Moreover, Ahithophel said unto Absalom, Let me now choose out 12,000 men, and I will arise and pursue after David this night. And I will come upon him while he is weary and weak-handed, and will make him afraid. And all the people that are with him shall flee, and I will smite the king only. And I will bring back all the people unto thee. The man whom thou seekest is as if all return. So all the people shall be in peace. And the saying pleased Absalom well, and all the elders of Israel." The first question number 1 on our sheet is, why was Ahithophel such a valuable asset to Absalom? And that answer to that question is found back in chapter 16. We talked about it just briefly last week. But in verse 23, it says that the counsel of Ahithophel was as if a man had inquired as the oracles of God. In other words, there was something about the counsel of Ahithophel that was godlike. And that's not to say that everything that he told people to do was moral or was right. But I think what the Bible is emphasizing is that his counsel was as highly esteemed or highly valued as if a man received word from God himself. And his counsel was used by David a lot. Obviously, it's used by Absalom a lot as we're reading in this story. And so it didn't mean that it was always good advice or moral advice, but it was always, it was right in the sense that it was the best thing from a physical standpoint to do. And imagine the value of that. If you were the leader of a nation and you had a person who every time they gave you counsel or advised you, it was the best counsel that you could find. It was like God himself had spoken. That would be a very valuable asset as a leader of any kingdom. Number 2 is the question, what plan of attack did Ahithophel recommend to Absalom? Well, remember that Ahithophel had helped bolster Absalom's claim to the throne by telling him to sleep with the 10 concubines, the 10 slave wives of David, that he had left behind in Jerusalem to kind of take care of the palace in his absence. And so now what he proposes is that Absalom launches a very bold military strike. If you go back, as we read in verses 1 through 4, the first thing that he says is, do it this very night. You know, this is the same day that David had left Jerusalem, and he pointed out David's going to be very weak. He's going to be weary from traveling. He's going to be discouraged, downhearted, dispirited. And so let me go, Ahithophel says, and I'll take with me 12,000 men. And he figured that doing this, of course, would strike fear into the hearts of the men of David. Again, they really hadn't had any time to regroup and reorganize and make any plans for the future. And so Ahithophel just thought this was a really good time to attack and kind of cause a state of confusion and disarray. And then he pointed out, let's make the aim of this attack one man. You're really only after one man, and that is David himself. So let's just focus on killing him. And if we kill him, then all the other pieces of the puzzle are going to fall into place. And so the summary that Ahithophel recommended to Absalom is you got to strike while the iron is hot. You know, that plot to kill David, like we said when we talked a little bit earlier, you know, it was wrong. It was totally evil. But in the sense of military strategy, and if you're trying to become the next king of Israel, that was probably the best advice that any person could give. But there's still people today who plot and seek after the lives of innocent people. You know, there are still leaders that are assassinated, and attempted assassinations are carried out. There are family members, there are wives, there are husbands, there are children that are murdered every day in our nation and in the world around. You know, there are employers and employees and friends and family. And every day there's just tragic examples of murder. How about abortion, the murder of innocent babies inside the womb? You know, if you were to stop and to look around in the headlines locally and nationally and then globally, murder is going to be one of the top headlines probably every day of society. But one of the things that we learn in studying the Bible is human life is something that is highly valued by God. In fact, it's valued above all other things here upon this earth. And so those who are guilty of murder are going to face the severe judgment of God in the end. Let's go to verse 5 here in 2 Samuel 17. Then said Absalom, Call now Hushai the Archite also, and let us hear likewise what he saith. And when Hushai was come to Absalom, Absalom spake unto him, saying, Ahithophel hath spoken after this manner. Shall we do after his saying? If not, speak thou. And Hushai said unto Absalom, The counsel that Ahithophel hath given is not good at this time. For said Hushai, Thou knowest thy father and his men, that they be mighty men, and they be chafed in their minds, as a bear robbed of her whelps in the field. And thy father is a man of war, and will not lodge with the people. Behold, he is now hid in some pit, or in some other place. And it will come to pass, when some of them be overthrown at the first, that whosoever heareth it will say, There is a slaughter among the people that follow Absalom. And he also that is valiant, whose heart is as the heart of a lion, shall utterly melt. For all Israel knoweth that thy father is a mighty man, and they which be with him are valiant men. Therefore I counsel that all Israel be gathered together unto thee, from Dan even to Beersheba, as the sand that is by the sea for multitude, and that thou go to battle in thine own person. So shall we come upon him in some place where he shall be found, and we will light upon him as the dew falleth upon the ground. And of him and of all the men that are with him there shall not be left so much as one. Moreover, if he be gotten into a city, then shall all Israel bring ropes to that city, and we will draw it into the river until there be not one small stone found there. And Absalom and all the men of Israel said, The counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel. For the Lord hath appointed to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel, to the intent that the Lord might bring evil upon Absalom. Question number 3 says, What was Hushai's reasoning to convince Absalom that Ahithophel's plan was not good? Remember, Ahithophel's plan was to attack that very night with 12,000 men while they were weary, while they were tired, while their spirits were low, and to focus on one man. It's interesting that Hushai, when he talks about the counsel of Ahithophel, speaks very highly of it. Notice that he said it is not good this time. You know, usually Ahithophel's advice was the best advice that a person could give. But he's careful not to attack him. You know, he's careful not to draw suspicion toward himself. And so what Hushai asks or says of Absalom, his idea was this. He said, first of all, remember the mighty men that are with your father. You know, this group of mighty men, you can read about them in 2 Samuel chapter 23, in 1 Chronicles 11. But these were a group of very famous men who were very skillful, and they were very fearless. And so they became a group of men that became the personal bodyguards of David himself. I think I mentioned a couple weeks ago in chapter 15, as David is coming out of the city, that there's this group called the Gibeonites. Well, you know, this is probably that same group, or the Gittites, not the Gibeonites. This is probably that same group that we read about in 2 Samuel 23 and 1 Chronicles chapter 11. Remember that one of those men that David encounters as he's leaving the city is Ittai, a man who's just arrived on the scene, and David kind of tells him, don't worry about getting involved in this. Well, if you read in that list of mighty men, Ittai is one of those men, and also Abishai, the man that we studied about last week, who wanted to cut off Shimei's head. And we don't have time to go and to read about all those men, but if you want to do that on your own, I'll just mention some of the feats. One of those men in that group had killed 800 men at one time. One of the men that we read about had fought in a battle and held his sword for so long, hanging onto it so tightly that his hand actually cramped around the sword itself, and his hand had to be pried loose. We read about another group of men who fought an entire army of Philistines defending one field of the Israelites. They were going to come in and take the harvest, and they fought them off. You'll read about another time that David was very thirsty and he desired to drink from the well of Bethlehem. And 3 of these men broke through an entire army of the Philistines and got some water from that well and carried it back to David. Abishai, we mentioned him. He was the man who wanted to kill Shimei. He had killed 300 men. We read about another man who had killed 2 very fierce fighters of Moab themselves. And then he'd also killed a lion in a pit while it was snowing. Evidently, he got thrown in a pit or caught in a pit with a lion in some way. And even despite the adverse conditions, he was able to kill this mighty animal. And then we read about another one who killed an Egyptian who was 7.5 feet tall. This Egyptian had a great spear, and the man who fought him only had a rod or a staff, but yet he took away that spear from that giant Egyptian, and he actually killed him with his own spear. So the point that I'm trying to make is these men were well known for their fighting skills. They were fearless men, and they were very skilled in the art of war. Many of them had killed many hundreds of men. And so Hushai reminds Absalom of this fact. Think about the men that David has with him. And then he also talks to him about David's war experience. Ahithophel wanted to attack immediately, and Hushai says, listen, these men you're fighting is no ordinary men, and your father is no ordinary king. Remember that David was a man who was a man of war, and he'd been involved in a lot of wars. And I was kind of thinking back, I can't think of one war or one fight that David ever lost. Whether it was facing a lion or a bear or a giant, it seemed like he was always victorious, and sometimes he used some unconventional means in fighting too. And so he said, your father is a man of war. He's going to understand what's going on, and he's going to be ready. If you try to surprise him at night, he's not going to be staying with the camp. He's going to be hiding somewhere else in a cave where you're not going to be able to find him. And also, he's probably thought of this beforehand, and he's probably already prepared to launch a counterattack if you were to come upon him with a surprise attack. And if you do that and your men are defeated and they become disheartened, then the whole kingdom's going to turn against you immediately. So while Ahithophel's advice was you got to strike while the iron's hot, Hushai kind of took more of the approach, you need to look before you leap. You need to step back and look and really evaluate the situation and take some steps to make sure that you win this victory. Number 4, the question is, what alternate advice did Hushai give to Absalom? Well, instead of only taking 12,000 men, he tells Absalom, what you need to do is you need to raise an army. You need to go and draw every soldier from Israel, from Dan to Beersheba. Dan was, almost, or one of the most northern cities of Israel. Beersheba was one of the most southern, and so he's saying from the entire nation of Israel, you need to amass this army that in his own estimation, he said, is going to be like the sands on the seashore. And then instead of Ahithophel leading these men like he had counseled Absalom, he would lead these 12,000 men. Hushai says to Absalom, you need to go to yourself. You need to be seen. You need to be the one who's in charge of this army. And of course, that probably had to appeal to the vanity of Absalom. And then he said, if we do that, we'll be as the dew on the ground. In other words, it's going to be certain, you're not going to stop the dew from coming on the ground. It's an inescapable thing. And he said, if you do this, you'll be able to do whatever you want. You can kill anyone you want. If David runs to some fortified city, you've got an army big enough. You don't have to worry about it. You can just take care of it right then and right there. Number 5, the question is, which advisor's plan was more likely to bring success to Absalom? Well, if you don't consider a very important fact, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, Ahithophel's plan was the one that was going to bring success to Absalom. If he had taken those 12,000 men and attacked David that night, there was a good chance that he probably would have overcome them. David wasn't prepared for that attack. He wasn't expecting it, and Absalom probably would have been king. But the problem was the Lord was on David's side. And so it really didn't matter what Absalom did, whose counsel he listened to, he was going to be defeated. It's reminiscent of the words of Abijah whenever he was fighting Jeroboam, the king of Israel. And he says in 2 Chronicles 13 and verse 12, God himself is with us for our captain. And then he goes on to say, fight ye not against the Lord God of your fathers, for ye shall not prosper. There have been many people through the annals of human history who have tried to fight against God. But nobody has won against him yet. And so it really didn't matter whose counsel Absalom listened to. Ahithophel's was the more from a physical standpoint, a military strategy, successful advice. But remember, Hushai was actually there. He was actually planted there by David to try to get David to be restored to the throne of Israel. So he was actually just trying to keep Ahithophel's advice from being followed and David from getting killed. Number 6 says, why did Absalom choose to follow Hushai's advice? Well, he thought it was better. You think about that and you kind of credit that a little bit to Hushai, and you think that was a remarkable achievement to be able to counter the advice of a man whose advice was so highly regarded by David and by Absalom himself. But Hushai probably had some good oratory skills. Certainly the plan that he proposed was more dramatic in nature. It involved this huge army. It involved Absalom being at the head of it and leading the attack itself. It was certainly a much safer plan than these 12,000 men. If you had that army, you could do about whatever you wanted to do. And so basically he thought it was better advice. But again, I want to remind you, it all goes back to the idea that God is in control here. And it's a good point to stop and to think about the sovereignty of God, the idea that God uses men and uses events to his advantage to accomplish his will and his purpose here upon this earth. And one of the things as Christians that we can always be assured of in this world is that God works. And his ultimate purpose in the events of the world and the people that come in this world is to accomplish his will and his purpose through these events and through these people. And 3 things are going to happen in this story. I know we haven't got to some of them yet, but Lord willing, we'll get there in just a little while. But first of all, David and his men, are spared in this attack. They escape being killed by Absalom. The second thing that we'll read about a little later on is Ahithophel commits suicide because of this. And so God has effectively removed this man whose counsel is very, very good for future events that are going to take place in this battle. And so now Hushai is really at the top, who's nothing more than a spy or David's right-hand man. And then it also allows David to reach a point, a city where he can be fortified, where he can kind of dig himself in and get prepared to fight in this battle that's coming up. Let's go to verse 15 of 2 Samuel 17. Then said Hushai unto Zadok and to Abiathar the priest, thus and thus did Ahithophel counsel Absalom and the elders of Israel, and thus have I counseled. Now therefore send quickly and tell David, saying, lodge not this night in the plains of the wilderness, but speedily pass over, lest the king be swallowed up and all the people that are with him. Now Jonathan and Ahimaaz stayed by in Rogel, for they might not be seen to come into the city. And a wench went and told them, and they went and told King David. Nevertheless, a lad saw them and told Absalom. But they went both of them away quickly and came to a man's house in Bahurim, which had a well in his court, whither they went down. And the woman took and spread a covering over the well's mouth, and spread ground corn thereon, and the thing was not known. And when Absalom's servants came to the woman of the house, they said, Where is Ahimaaz and Jonathan? And the woman said unto them, They be gone over the brook of water. And when they sought and could not find them, they returned to Jerusalem. Okay, so number 7 is, what message did Hushai send to David via the priest? Hushai wasn't sure whose advice the king was going to follow. And so as soon as he hears about the possibility of Ahithophel's plan being put into action, he immediately sends word to David that he needs to get across the Jordan River as quickly as possible. Number 8, why did the priest's sons end up hiding from Absalom's men? These men, David had put kind of this chain of messengers in place where he could figure out what was going on and what he needed to do. And so it really started with Hushai, and then Hushai tells Zadok and Abiathar, the priests that David had sent back to Jerusalem, who were spies. Hushai tells them the plan. They send out a servant girl who runs to the sons, or to these 2 priests' sons, and tries or relays the plan to them, Ahimaaz and Jonathan. And they're waiting at Enrogel. Now, Enrogel is believed to be just outside the city of Jerusalem. When you study about the geography of Jerusalem, it was surrounded by valleys. The valley of Kidron, the valley of Hinnom, probably somewhere in that area, or maybe even intersecting between the two. So they were waiting in this valley. This servant girl comes to them, gives them the message that David needs to get across the Jordan immediately. But the problem was these 2 men were spotted by a young man. They were obviously outside the city because they were known to be David's loyalists. They were known to be on his side. And so when this young man sees them, he immediately sends message to Absalom, and Absalom sends out his servants to try to capture them. And so they end up on running away. They're probably on foot and didn't really have a way to outrun the servants of Absalom. So they run to a man's house who was loyal to David, and that man and that woman of that house hid them in a cistern that probably held rainwater, and put a cover over the top of it, and then put corn on top of it to try to hide them or disguise them. Number 9, who assisted Ahimaaz and Jonathan in hiding from Absalom's men? Well, that was a woman of the house. That woman of that house is unnamed, but she was a very important cog, a very important part in God's plan for saving David and to restore him to the throne. And it's just a reminder of the many times in the scripture we read about God accomplishing these great things, or the great men and women of the Bible doing these great things. And behind them are these unnamed characters who are essential to the success of God's plan, and the plan and the success of and the great achievements of these men and of these women. And when I think about the great men and women of the Bible, and probably when we think about them, we always want to be that great character. We want to be an Abraham, or a David, or a Job, or an Elijah, or John the Baptist, or somebody like that, or Sarah, a Mary, a Ruth, somebody like that. But what you don't always read about are those unnamed and unrecognized characters in a story who are essential to their success. And not all of us are going to be, those great characters of a Bible, but we can certainly be those who help contribute to the greatness of others and to the fulfillment of God's plan. And so that's a very comforting thought, I think, as we read this story. Let's look at verse 21. It came to pass after they were departed that they came up out of the well and went and told King David, and said unto David, Arise and pass quickly over the water, for thus hath Ahithophel counseled against you. Then David arose, and all the people that were with him, and they passed over Jordan. By the morning light there lacked not one of them that was not gone over Jordan. So number 10 says, what did David do in response to Hushai's message? Well, David ordered an immediate night crossing of the Jordan River. Now understand, That would have been a very dangerous thing to do, especially at night. But yet the Bible tells us that not one of them was lost in the crossing of this river. The next morning, all of them are there. Notice verse 23. And when Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and arose and gat him home to his house, to his city, and put his household in order. And he hanged himself and died and was buried in the sepulchre of his father. Number 11 asks the question, how did Ahithophel take the news that his advice had not been followed? And the answer is he took it very hard. Why did Ahithophel hang himself? Why did he commit suicide? I don't know. It's probably one of two reasons. Either number one, he knew that Absalom wasn't going to win because he didn't follow this counsel. Or number two could have been, he couldn't stand to be second best. His advice had always been the most highly regarded advice of anyone. And now the king is listening to the advice of Hushai. His plan is better. And so maybe he just couldn't stand the thought of being second best. And so he goes out and he kills himself. Now it should also be mentioned that if David was restored to the throne, of course, Ahithophel would have been punished for being a traitor. And if he believed that David was going to be restored, he probably just thought, well, I'll spare myself the punishment. It is also interesting, we mentioned last week, that a verse that's spoken about Ahithophel by David in the book of Psalms was actually later applied to Judas, his own familiar friend, the one in whom he had trusted, whom he had eaten bread, betrayed him. And I talk about sometimes the types and the shadows of the Old Testament and the New Testament, and Ahithophel was a type of Judas. It's also interesting, as we just read here, that Ahithophel, when nobody would listen to him, he went out and he hung himself. And remember Judas, whenever he comes back to the temple in Matthew chapter 27, he brings back the 30 pieces of silver. He tells the priests about what he has done. They're not going to listen to him. They say, we don't have anything to do in this matter. And what does Judas do? Well, he goes out and he hangs himself. The great wisdom of God, the foreshadowing of the great plan that God had in mind to save mankind. Notice verse 24 in 2 Samuel 17. Then David came to Mahanaim, and Absalom passed over Jordan, he and all the men of Israel with him. And Absalom made Amasa captain of the host instead of Joab, which Amasa was a man's son, whose name was Ithra, an Israelite, that went in to Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister to Zeruiah, Joab's mother. So Israel and Absalom pitched in the land of Gilead. Number 12 is the question, who led the armies of Absalom to Gilead in pursuit of David? And that was Amasa, as we just read there. He was actually Absalom's cousin and David's nephew. And it's interesting that the two commanders that are involved in this war are both nephews of David from different sisters. And so this was a family war. This was a civil war, if you will, a family affair, very nasty war that's not going to end very good, as we'll end up studying. But think about why David escaped. Why is it that he and all these other people escaped and were able to be spared their lives? And the reason is because they listened to the warning that was sent to them by Hushai. Hushai did his part. He sent the warning out, but David had to listen to that warning. There's a great lesson for us because God sends us warnings through his word. And while God has done his part, it's up to us to listen to those warnings that God has issued to us in his word. And if we'll do that, it will spare us our life in the end. Let's finish up in verse 27 and through 29. It came to pass when David was come to Mahanaim that Shobai the son of Nahash of Rabbah of the children of Ammon, and Machir the son of Amiel of Lodabar, and Barzillai the Gileadite of Rogelim brought beds and basins and earthen vessels and wheat and barley and flour and parched corn and beans and lentils and parched pulse and honey and butter and sheep and cheese of kine for David and for all the people that were with him to eat. For they said, the people is hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. Number 13 is the question, who brought provisions to David at Mahanaim? And it's interesting, these people that we read about, some of them were Ammonites, some of them were Gileadites. David was now in the Transjordan area. He'd crossed over the river Jordan, so he was closer to some of these people. And it's interesting to study how the friendship and the influence of David And the character of David was not just something that was respected in Israel itself, but it transcended the national boundaries. And that's a good reminder for us that true friendship and true hospitality, it extends all borders. It extends beyond the social realm, beyond the economical realm, and even beyond racial boundaries. And as Christians, we're supposed to be like these people. We're supposed to be willing to help and to serve those who are in need. And when you think about today, when you look around us, there's people in need everywhere. There's people who are discouraged. There are people who are going through financial difficulties. There are people who are going through broken relationships. There are people who need to be visited. There are people who need to be comforted. There are people who need to be assured. Who should be doing that? Well, we should as Christians. Our job is to be the ones who are reaching out and helping, and certainly serving and ministering to people is part of God's will for us here upon this earth. Let's end tonight with a prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this time that we've had together to study your precious word. We thank you for that revelation that you've given to us to help guide us to that heavenly home with you one day. We pray as we meditate upon the things that we've studied that you'll give us the wisdom to learn the lessons you want us to learn from them, to apply them to our lives, to be able to teach them to other people. We're so thankful for Jesus Christ and his sacrifice that he made upon us, or for us upon the cross. We're thankful for his blood and for his body that was shed for us there, for your great love that you've extended toward us, for your mercy and for your grace. We're mindful of those who are hurting at this time, who are sick and who are ill. We ask that you would be with them and bless them in their efforts to recover their health. We pray especially tonight for Brenda Jeffrey. We ask that you would be with her and help the wound that she's experiencing to heal. Help those who are caring for her to do that which is most needful for her. And Father, we pray that you would be with our nation and our world in this difficult time and keep us under your watch and your protection, and help us to turn to thee for trust and comfort and strength. And this we ask through the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.